Welcome to the Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights, where law and AI collide. Get ready to level up your legal game with us. We've got career advice, cutting-edge developments, mind-blowing legal tech, and more. Know someone making waves in the legal AI world? Nominate them, or even nominate yourself. We love courageous souls. And don't forget, we want to hear from you too. Ask questions, drop comments. Let's build a community of legal superheroes. But here's the deal. We're all about to have a blast. AI may be serious, but we're here to make it fun. So buckle up, get ready to power up, and let's embark on this exciting journey together. Now, let's introduce your fearless host, Olga Mack. Get ready to dive into the awesomeness of Notes to My Legal Self, AI Insights. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited for today's conversation because not only are we going to talk to someone who knows quite a lot about privacy and security, she's also a dear friend. I've known her for a long time and have seen her grow up and add a lot of value to this community of law, privacy, and security enthusiasts. So I very much look forward to this conversation. Debbie, welcome to the show. So excited that you are here. For those folks who haven't met you, please introduce yourself.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, Olga. This is fun to do this show. We've known each other for many years, so I'm really excited to be here and very proud of all the things that you are doing in the community. So my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. I'm the founder, CEO, and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. I work at the intersection of emerging technology and privacy. I am a technologist by trade, been doing digital transformation even back to the time when they just call it transformation. And so I do that as well as advise clients on implementation and development of emerging technologies and where that touches privacy issues for companies around the world.
I love it. You've been doing digital transformation before it had digital in its name. That is so cool. Well, before you become a data diva, what was the past? What was the scenic route? How did you get there?
Wow. Well, the scenic route was, I was actually a philosophy major in college. So I thought I was going to become a lawyer. I had a detour. Actually, my mother was sick and I had to take care of her and I had to find something to do and be able to support myself. So I actually moved into a digital space, started working, my first digital jobs were to help libraries create databases of books. So you're probably too young to remember when there were card catalogs and libraries, but I was creating databases of books before I started on my other digital transformation journey. You and many other people may have known me from some of my legal field work. So I was very early on in helping organizations create databases even before some of the big name database players were available in that space. But I always did technology consulting in terms of things that were emerging. So things in ad tech, things in fintech. Anytime someone wanted to do a system or something, that's what I was really interested in. But then also I have a personal interest in privacy because I read a book in 1995 called The Right to Privacy. And Caroline Kennedy was a co-author of that book. And what I saw as I went forward in my career, some of my personal interests in privacy started to converge with some of the data work that I was doing. So around the time, I would say mid 2000, 13, 15 or something like that, companies that knew me started calling me about privacy. So like, hey, we know that you know this privacy stuff, so come talk to us. So one of the first companies that came talk to me was McDonald's Corporation. And so I talked to their corporate legal team about privacy and data and how they move stuff around. So yeah, that's how I get started in my privacy journey.
I love it. So the privacy talk beyond the search and seizure.
Right.
Which is what most people learned in law school. Well, we are in the midst of another transformation, one of many that already happened and to come. We have this wave of AI, and it does have an impact on privacy and security. So what are we looking at?
You're right. So this is a huge moment, a huge turning point in the digital world. And so what we're looking at is the world sort of turned upside down by this technology. So the types of things that maybe people did manually before or were too hard for them to do, some of these AI tools are creating a situation where it's doing a lot more of the heavy lifting than people were doing before. It's creating, AI is not new, but I think what is new is the democratization of AI. So people who are able to use these tools and may not have to be coders, may not have to be data experts. So it's creating a situation where maybe organizations or people who would not have otherwise been able to have access to AI systems, they can actually dip their toe into the water, so that they can find ways to leverage these technologies. So for me, it's a very exciting time. I've been working with AI for a long time, and I think people who worked with AI systems, especially within organizations, a lot of what they've been accustomed to is more purpose-built AI systems. So now what we're seeing is more general AI, like Swiss Army knife type AI systems that can be, used for multiple different purposes. So I think, hopefully some of the fanfare around that will die down, and we'll see people do some real implementation of these tools and make it more real in their own environments.
I think you just softly say, shut up and do work.
Yeah, right.
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, I love that. That's a great message. Do that. I actually want to pursue a little bit this purpose-built AI versus general AI and the difference. So what is implication for privacy and security in that transition from, purpose-built AI to general AI in terms of what we see on the ground?
Yeah. So purpose-built AI were typically systems that were built for a specific purpose. So it's very limited in what it can do, very limited in what it, the harm, typically those things are studied very carefully. Try to make sure that it's only doing that one thing. So with general purpose AI, because it can do so many things, sometimes companies, they, the ease of the front end use of it, they don't really understand what's happening on the back end. So for example, I tell companies, for example, for privacy, when you put private personal information of someone into, like, for example, a generative AI system, can't really take it out, right? It's sort of like scrambling eggs. So you can't really unscramble an egg, right? So if you have data of a personally identifiable person in a data set that's, AI driven, you're increasing your privacy risk, and it's not something where you can actually take that data out. So you have to be really circumspect about what goes in those systems, and also who accesses those systems. Because, no matter where you work in any type of company, not every person in the company needs to have access to all types of data. So creating this huge cauldron of information that anyone can draw on will probably create a situation where maybe some people are seeing things they shouldn't see. So you're creating like a more of an internal access issue within the organization. But of course, we see a lot of stuff in the news about people concerned about, IP of data that's, in this cauldron of data already, how much stuff that they can use, what are their risks. Obviously, I think companies are also very concerned about people putting their company information into public AI models. So, all that is new. Before people had access to these general purpose AI models, there were more narrow scope of what they could do with these models. They had to have more skilled people involved. So, that risk wasn't as high. So we're looking at a situation where we're bringing on more sophisticated, complex computing within organizations, but then we're also raising the risk, especially if you don't know what you should and shouldn't do with these tools.
I love that. I am still processing the unscrambled eggs analogy. As somebody who's known for colorful language, I have this vivid imagination of PII scrambled and trying to put it back together. So you just, gave me a lot to think about it. So thank you so much for that image. There is a trade-off, especially with this increased risk of generative AI. There is a very clear trade-off between privacy, security, and even ethics. and innovation. It's really, how fast do we want to go and how much risk we want to take. And there is sort of a calculus at every level. There's a world level, there's a country level, there's an organization level, there's an individual level. So let's talk about that trade-off between innovation and privacy and security. And how should a leader go about making a right decision for themselves, for their team, for their company? What are the questions to ask? What systems to use? What is the process?
Yeah. Excellent question. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, that's the easiest question in the world. That's what you get for it when you give me a good analogy. I start thinking.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't preach abstinence. So some people say, hey, AI is terrible. You shouldn't use it. You want to fold your arms and sit in the corner. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not real life, right? So regardless of whether you want to use it or not, it's here. Companies are going to use it. There are probably tools that you use every day that already have AI features in it. So there's no way that you're going to get away from it. But when companies are thinking about whether they should use these tools, think about the problems that you have. Think about understand the capability of these tools and see how those capabilities fit with maybe a problem that you have. I tell companies, start with those lower risk cases, low stakes risk cases, right? So think about something that you do every day and is very manual, or something that you do is very repetitive. Those may be tasks that can be offloaded to an AI tool, right? It can do those things much faster, much quicker, probably, better accuracy. But then you can't trust these systems because you can trust them to a certain extent, but you can't advocate your human judgment to AI systems. So I tell people these AI systems are a source of information. They're not a source of truth. So just like you go on the internet and you don't believe everything you see on the internet, especially with generative AI, we know that these systems can hallucinate. They can tell tall tales. And a lot of that is based on the way that the parameters are set and the data that's in those models. The data, the systems are built to give an answer, even if it doesn't have a really good answer, and it'll make one up, right? And that's the way that it's built. So you have to have someone who can check those outputs, make sure that that information is accurate. And I tell companies again, try with those lower level use cases. I think it's very different than what you see in the news, because people wanted to cure cancer and do all this other type of stuff. But really start with those nagging tasks that you have, those manual, mundane things that maybe you don't enjoy as much. And so that may actually help free you up so that you can do things in your job or your company that you enjoy a lot more.
I love the message of keeping the human judgment. Whatever you do, keep the judgment. I mean, it makes sense. It only makes sense, especially if you're a lawyer, because that's why people hire you. People hire you for your judgment, or any professional, really. But in law, you actually have an ethical duty to keep your judgment, in addition to professional responsibility as an adult professional in the workforce. So let's talk about specific examples, because you can, I think of technology, any technologies, including AI, as a very sharp knife. You can use it to kill, you can use it to cure. And AI could be used to enhance privacy. It could also be used to create many more exponential risks at scale. Yeah. So let's talk about uses of AI for both good and bad. What could possibly go right and what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. First of all, I think of AI as a machete and not a scalpel. So when people get into AI systems, they wanted to do these little, nuanced tasks, and it really isn't created that way, right? So it's going to help you maybe make a huge cut, right? But it's not going to do those nuanced gray area type of things. So if you know that, you have to think about, okay, so is this a task that I need like more heft or heavy lifting, or is this something that needs a little bit more, detail oriented look at what you're trying to do? So I tell people, think of it that way. So unfortunately, I don't know why I see people in the news, they go towards these dystopian type use cases, right? Like, let's use AI for hiring and let's not let humans be in the loop, right? And that's like, regulators are all over that. They're like, no, that's not the way you're supposed to do things, right? So what these regulators, or what is happening and what can go wrong with these systems is when you have a system and you're using it and it's making decisions without humans, that is a problem because humans can be harmed as a result of that. So I tell people, let's say, for instance, you're doing a project and you just need an outline for a project. There's no proprietary company information in that. The thing that you ask, nobody cares about that, right? Go for it. Do that as much as you possibly can. But if you're trying to do something that will impact the life or liberty or health or welfare of someone and there isn't a human in the loop, that is a problem in the AI system because, AIs, they're not human. They're not going to be human regardless of what people say. They're not going to be sentient like humans. So we cannot abdicate our human judgment in these systems. And regulators, they're not going to be satisfied if you say, hey, well, I don't know what happened. The AI told me to do this. And they're like, well, wait a minute. Like, who's the human here? Or who's the parent? That's almost like you're saying, oh, I did what my kid told me to do. It's like, okay, who's the parent? So you have to balance it in that way.
Yeah. Well, laws regulate and punish behavior of humans. First and
Right.
foremost, that's kind of how our laws are designed now for hundreds of years. That is not changing anytime soon. I love this AI, a machete, not a scalpel, and definitely not a pocket knife. So it is a heavy machinery and it needs to be handled with care. In fact, we just came back from a vacation where my mother was sitting next to somebody who was using machete to cut up the coconut, and she got up and literally went to sit far away as possible. And as she was going, she was speaking in Russian, saying, "I really don't want this guy to miss." So it was very vivid how she just physically got up and left. That aside, I do want to talk because you transitioned to regulators and legislators. We see some activities. I mean, there's EU AI Act. There are a few things in the United States. There's the Biden executive order. There is, stuff in New York related to those HR systems that you cannot completely send away human judgment to. What are your thoughts about sort of the trends and regulations, and how do you think about it? Where do you think we're going? How long will it unfold? And I guess, what is the impact on privacy, security, and innovation?
Wow, that's a big question. I love these. So let's see. Regulations. So in the US, I don't think there's going to be any regulation soon on AI. And I think that's the reason why we have the AI executive order that came out. So basically, the government is saying, hey, agencies, we want you to do X, Y, and Z on AI. And so what we're going to have within the next 12 months is a lot of drip, drip, drip coming from the government in terms of what are their actual activities around AI. And actually, I think that in the future, it may bode well for potential regulation, but I don't think it'll be coming soon. So some of that will be let's have some leadership on AI. Let's make sure we're looking at those harms, those human harms. Let's see how things go, right? So after a year of the government really focusing their attention there, they have people who are going to be in these AI roles. I think the result of what happens with that may end up being foundational to what possibly will happen in the US in terms of AI regulation. But the states are going full speed ahead on that. So we are seeing a few things happen on the state level in AI. So you mentioned the New York hiring bill where companies have to do these bias assessments on an annual basis. California actually has an executive order that's sort of modeled after the AI Bill of Rights that came out of the White House. And I think it also has some coloring of the AI executive order from the White House. There's actually a deep fake law in the state of Illinois that went into effect in January 1st, 24. So there's little trickles of things happening in AI, especially on the state level in the US. Everyone's really looking very closely at what's happening in Europe with the AI Act, because they, as you know, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU is very influential around the world in terms of how laws around privacy since then have developed, even in the US. So we've not obviously taken on GDPR-like things wholesale, but we have borrowed, and many other jurisdictions have borrowed from that. So I think that's going to have a big influence on other countries, the AI Act in the EU.
Oh yeah, I know about EU. I had to make a few appearances in the past, so I do know where that is going very, very well for in-house lawyers. And then there's FTC.
Yeah.
Because we just seen a lot of power given to FTC, very broad powers related to AI. It seems to me that we are very much trending in the same direction as we've been trending with privacy for the last, 10, 20 years.
Right. Yeah. Right. So the FTC, we're very impressed with what they've been doing in terms of their enforcement, really broadening what people thought they should be doing, especially around, harm and deceptive practices, and really interested in some of the things that they're writing, and also some of the enforcement actions that have come out. And as you say, seeing that they are now starting to or can issue those CIDs related to the way companies do AI systems, I think that's pretty game changing.
Yeah, no, it is. I am of a very high opinion on FTC as an agency, so I do have quite a lot of high hopes that because they do pull out a lot. It's inherently an agency that is to protect consumers, so they are intrinsically putting out a lot of guidance for consumers and builders now for a while. So I have a lot more faith in this agency leading and balancing innovation and privacy and security than, frankly, any other agency in the United States. And I do think that this is where the expertise around data actually lies, because the agency has had an opportunity to deal with those heavy issues now for a few decades. So I'm pretty excited about FTC getting all these powers and hiring up and making sure that AI is done responsibly. So let's talk about this responsible, ethical AI. When it comes to privacy and security, what are sort of the top issues? And if I'm a leader of any organization, mid-sized, large organization, how should I approach this beyond sort of asking what is the right thing to do?
I think, I'm a data person, so I'm going to go the data route for privacy and security. So 2 things that organizations need to think about when they are looking at using AI systems is data provenance and data lineage. So provenance and lineage are a bit different. So provenance is, and this is what we hear a lot in the news, do you have the rights? Are you legally able to use the data that you're putting in those systems? And so some of that from a privacy perspective, especially if it's a data of a human, it's like, hey, am I supposed to have this data in the first place? Do I have a legal right to use that data in the first place? So that's a huge issue that we're seeing play out, or we're going to see play out in court cases, definitely. But for companies that want to use those systems internally, they have to ask themselves that themselves, right? Even if they're not using a public model, they're using a model maybe that they develop in the house, they have to ask about that provenance question. But then lineage is very important as well in AI systems. So it's not just that, okay, I have the data, I have a legal right to use the data. And then once it gets into the organization, you need to track that data all the way through its data lifecycle. So you can succeed at data provenance and then you fail at lineage, right? So there has to be responsibility all the way through from cradle to grave with that data. And I think that companies had to have that level of transparency or even tracking of data once it got into the organization. So I think there's going to be some growing pains for organizations that were not accustomed to, tracking that data from, because the data rights really should travel with the data. And a lot of times when the organization, sometimes they very much focus on getting the data in, don't focus as much on what happens to the data all the way through the data lifecycle. And this is what consumers want to know about. This is part of their, legal rights in terms of privacy. This is what regulators are very concerned about, especially if you're doing something that could possibly cause some type of harm to a human, and that end of life thing. So organizations from a privacy and security perspective, companies shouldn't be keeping data forever. And before, there really was no impetus to get rid of anything. So, we just came off, the last, 20 years, the big data thing where, let's collect everything. And big data is the answer to everything. And now it's like, okay, do you have a purpose? Why do you have it? Once the purpose expired, you have to get rid of it. So we're seeing companies that hold on too much data. Is data, especially data that is old with an organization, is some of companies' biggest risks. So you see in the news around companies being breached with data. A lot of times that's old data, right? That's stuff that isn't as protected as it should be. Maybe it's aged out. It's not as important, but it creates a huge risk when companies have it. So in an AI system, is very important, and for the health of the AI systems that you're using. If there's data that's aging out, it's not as vital to the organization. You have to find a way to get that data out of those systems or create different systems.
I love the definition of provenance versus lineage. Thank you for that. I actually have a follow-up question. So do you think that the lineage starts once it actually enters the company? Or do you think, because at some point you acquire, you could start if that's kind of when you're given that, like a PII. But for example, you could be acquiring data for advertising purposes that was created elsewhere. It has a lineage well before the company. It was scrambled somewhere, and so provenance, having rights, copyrights, privacy rights, all of that, that's one thing. But lineage, which kind of goes to the issue of, I don't know, accuracy, not sufficient but necessary condition for that. How do you tell me more about lineage? How do you think of lineage? When does it start? How much do you need to know? At what point? How much back? Price you need to go to ascertain lineage. How do you think of that?
That's a good question. I think lineage starts before you get the data. So I think the problem that organizations have with lineage right now, the way that they thought traditionally, especially around data governance, it didn't really matter where the data came from. It's like, you have it now, and this is what you have to do with it, right? Now with AI systems, you have to know, like, where did this data come from? Like, why do we even have it? What are we doing with it, right? I'll give you an example that came up a few months ago that was with Twitter, actually. So Twitter had a situation where they were asking for email addresses or phone numbers of people to do two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So that's totally fine, right? So they're a customer. You ask them, it's voluntary for them to actually do this authentication. They gave the data, right? So that's the provenance. So they had a legal right to have it. They asked for it in the right way. And then somehow the organization, the marketing department, got a hold of that data, and they started using it to advertise to these people. And that was not okay, because they didn't have permission. That's not why people gave them the data in the first place. So this is where lineage, you can go off the rails with lineage, because especially from a privacy perspective, because if you're going to use data for something other than what you initially obtained it for, that may become a privacy issue, because a lot of privacy laws are really tied to purpose of data, right? So maybe someone said, if you had asked at the beginning, okay, we want to use this data for two-factor authentication, but then can we also use it for marketing, and then you give the person the choice. So it's all about transparency, being able to communicate, and not going off the rails in the lineage part. And this is like, a lot of companies focus, provenance is important, no question, But a lot of companies go off the rails on lineage. So I want people to focus both both of those areas, because that's where a lot of the privacy issues happen.
Yeah, and your privacy policy states the purpose.
Right.
It's a requirement of a privacy policy. There is no enforceable privacy policy that doesn't state the purpose for which data is collected. It's required by essentially every law. So yes, you absolutely collect for a purpose which you need to keep track of. And that is actually hard. That actually requires effort on the part of the organization. So a few brief questions, because we are definitely at the end. One is, let's talk about the future trends. Where do you think we are going, both technologically, actually business-wise, and legally, and kind of what are the trends? What should we watch out for?
Trends. Okay. Well, I know there's a lot of talk in the news about large language models. I think the future will be little language models, right? So little models for companies or for people, where they'll have like discrete sets of data that they can work on that only they can see. So not having your eggs scrambled into a large language model. I think that's definitely going to be the future. I think that there's going to have to be a lot more training and education, because AI, I don't want to necessarily compare it to like the internet or, the advent of the internet or computers, but, there's going to be so much AI in everything that we do that all of us are going to have a fundamental basic knowledge of AI. So we can't sit on the sidelines and say, hey, I don't want to participate. I don't want to use AI. It's here now, right? So if I use a castle analogy, you can't just close the castle gates because it's in the castle already. So I think companies need to really invest in educating their employees about AI, best uses for it, get creative about it, but also make sure that you're thinking about those privacy and security risks about collecting and retaining too much data. So if you have a valid reason, valid purpose, no problem, right? If you don't, that's where people get in trouble.
I'm with you on small models. In fact, what I'm seeing in technology is a bouquet of small models solves really big problems. The models that go with deep expertise, very narrowly tailored, and you kind of use components, really can solve a lot of things that would be super helpful to most organizations. Maybe last question around individuals that lead organizations. What are sort of practical things they can do to really continue on the path of being responsible with data and security? Because many of these companies have, as we're finding out every week with every breach, they do have a lot of information for individuals, and this, has a lot of implications once it reaches black market and all of that. So what is the sort of top things, in the age of AI, when it comes to privacy, what leaders, responsible organizations, executive boards should be thinking and doing to make sure that maybe they're not part of the news cycle, to make sure that they're good stewards of the data they've been entrusted for a particular purpose?
Great question. I would say ask why. Why do we have this data? What are we doing with it? What's the purpose? A lot of times people never ask that question. They're like, let's collect as much as we can. Data is the new gold. I tell companies data is a lump of coal if you have it and you shouldn't be using it, right? And so the perfect purpose has expired. You have data that you don't need. It's just creating more risk within your organization. So ask your question about, what are we collecting and why? What are retaining and why? And then try to build strategies to make sure that you're only collecting what you need, and there has to be an end of life, right, to data. So if you're keeping data forever, you're just creating more risk within your organization. We're not saying that if you actually need the data, you have a purpose for it, that you can't keep it. But once that purpose expires, you have to have a strategy to be able to figure out what are you going to do with this data? Are you going to anonymize it? Are you going to delete it? You have to have a plan.
I love that. By the way, I do know my legal self so I can talk to my friends for no reason and big reasons, because I have a lot to say. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Every time I talk to you, I learn a lot from you. If you're not following Debbie on LinkedIn, are you anywhere else? Because I'm mostly on LinkedIn following you. Do you have any other social presence that you would like people to be directed to?
Sure. They can look at my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. I have all my videos and podcasts and papers and stuff on there. Also, I have videos. I do 5-minute videos every week. They're on YouTube as well.
Yeah, so do that. Debbie is definitely a pleasure to watch. You'll learn quite a lot from the kind of from her thought leadership and insights. And I will say you're very entertaining. I really enjoyed the content you put out. You're definitely a role model from that perspective as well. We covered a lot of ground. What is one takeaway or learning or thing that you want to make sure, if you get nothing else from this conversation, what is the one thing you want folks to take away?
I want folks to take away that we can't abstain from AI, right? So people the naysayers who maybe don't like it, don't want to use it, that train has left the station. Like that boulder is rolling down the hill, so don't get run over by it. Learn about it. Even if you're just reading an article once a day, learn about it, because a lot of what's happening with AI will end up on your desk if it's not there already.
I love that. I just put out a newsletter, and I basically said you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. I think that pretty much captures where we are with AI. You can never leave. Good. I put a lot on Debbie's face. Debbie, now I'm gonna challenge you to a song in your next creation. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you everyone for being part of this fantastic conversation. I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
And that brings us to the end of another thrilling episode on the Notes to My Legal Self AI Insights. We had a fantastic time exploring the fascinating intersection of law and AI with you. But hold on tight, because the adventure doesn't stop here. Stay connected with us on social media to continue the conversation, share your thoughts, and be part of our incredible community of legal enthusiasts. Together, we can inspire, learn, and make a real impact on the world of law and AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who could benefit from the exciting insights we discussed. Let's spread the knowledge and enthusiasm far and wide.